It's my pleasure to present the Papanicolaou Award for 2020. And this year, it goes to Dr. Edmund Cibas. The Papanicolaou Award, established in 1958, is the highest award given by our society. It is given to a physician in recognition of meritorious service in the field of cytopathology. Dr. Cibas is currently professor of pathology at Harvard Medical School and is director of cytology at the Brigham and Women's Hospital. You know just how many superlatives can you use to describe one person? Dr. Cibas is an accomplished pathologist who, with Dr. Barbara DePatman, produced a textbook, as it says here, that is the center of my cytotechnology students' lives. He is co-editor of the Thyroid Fine Aspiration monograph, now in its second edition, that revolutionized the cytology. Not only did they place excellent pictures of thyroid fine aspiration in the monograph, but developed a tier system along with risk of malignancy that helped us understand what's going on and certainly helped management. He's past president of the American Society of Cytopathology for the years 2016-17. He helped advance and stabilize the financial structure of our society, and I'm very indebted to him. And he stands well among past and future presidents. Ed is also an accomplished pianist. He gave us one of the most magical moments that I've ever personally experienced at a professional meeting. He and Dr. Andre Uolu presented a conference called Music Without Borders at the opening ceremonies of the 2013 International Congress of Cytology in Paris. My wife Tina and I were breathless by the event, and you can still find it on YouTube. Dr. Cibas is a model for civility, kindness, and dedication. I am proud to be the person that has the honor of presenting the Papanicolaou Award to Dr. Cibas.
Edmund Cibas. Dr. Edmund Cibas obtained his medical degree from Harvard Medical School and completed a pathology residency at the Brigham and Women's Hospital. He studied cytology with Sally Beth Buckner at the AFIP and completed a cytology fellowship at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center under the membership of Drs. Stephen Hadju and Myron Melamed. Dr. Cibas is currently professor of pathology at Harvard Medical School and director of cytology at the Brigham and Women's Hospital in Boston. He is the program director of the Cytopathology Fellowship at the Brigham and Women's Hospital and has co-directed the annual Harvard Medical School Advances in Cytology and Small Biopsies postgraduate course since 1989. He is co-author of Cytology, Diagnostic Principles and Clinical Correlates, now in its 5th edition, and co-editor of the Bethesda System for Reporting Thyroid Cytopathology. Dr. Cibas completed a term as president of the American Society of Cytopathology in 2016-17. He received the Lifetime Achievement Award from the Papanicolaou Society of Cytopathology in 2019. As someone who once dreamed of being a concert pianist, Dr. Cibas performed a short program of music for piano four hands at the opening ceremony of the International Academy of Cytology meeting in Paris in 2013.
Well, thank you, Dan, and a big thanks to all of you for this wonderful award and for tuning in. I have to say I've attended virtually every ASC meeting since 1985, and so I've had the pleasure of hearing quite a few Papanicolaou addresses in my day. There's a general outline that I've noticed, and I intend to follow it, starting with some reminiscing about my years learning and practicing cytology, then some words of appreciation for my mentors, my students, and my colleagues, and finally, a few words of what I hope is wisdom and hope for the future. The first two, the reminiscence and appreciation, I think are easy, but it's with some apprehension that I dare offer any words of wisdom or predictions. One of the things I've enjoyed most from past Papanicolaou addresses is hearing the stories of the speaker's journey and seeing photos of them as young men and women when the world was their oyster and so full of possibilities. I hope I won't disappoint by doing the same. My first teacher in cytology was cytotechnologist Sally Beth Buckner. During my PATH residency, I did a rotation in cytology at the AFIP, and every morning Sally Beth would spend an hour or more reviewing cases with me from her extensive teaching collection. She was a superb teacher, and I owe her a debt of gratitude. Her daily tutorials gave me my foundational training in cytology. I decided to pursue a cytopathology fellowship with the encouragement of Dr. Ramsey Cotran, the chair of pathology where I did my residency, and the author of one of the most widely read pathology textbooks. So I moved to New York City for cytopathology fellowship training at Memorial Sloan Kettering. This is the front entrance to the hospital on York Avenue, the door that I walked through every morning for a year, and here I am at my desk, my first month of fellowship. My mentors there were Dr. Mike Melamed, Chair of Pathology, and Mrs. Wanda Walinska, the Chief Cytotechnologist. Yes, the very same Melamed and Walinska that we all know from urine cytology. After completing my fellowship, Dr. Cotran offered me a job back at the Brigham, and I've been here ever since. I joined a very distinguished department and had the luxury of working with some brilliant pathologists, among them Drs. Chris Fletcher, Dr. Cotran, and Dr. Chris Crum. Another great mentor was Dr. Torsten Löwhagen. The truth is that when I trained as a fellow in the 1980s, a pathologist-performed FNA was not widely accepted and certainly wasn't taught in most fellowship programs. Like so many of my generation, if you wanted to learn FNA technique and establish an FNA center, you made a pilgrimage to the Karolinska Hospital, where FNA by pathologists was pioneered and perfected. The service there was run by this great man whom everyone called Torsten, and I applied to him for a 1-month sabbatical. This was just enough to teach me the very basics, as you can see here, and with those in hand, I established an FNA center at the Brigham. The next person I have to acknowledge is Barbara Duckenman. Barbara was the chief of cytology at the nearby Beth Israel Hospital in Boston. We became friends, and I quickly learned what a powerhouse she was and is. We had lunch together at an ASC meeting in New Orleans in the late 1980s, at which time she proposed that we develop a cytology CME course that would be sponsored by Harvard Medical School, where we both had academic appointments. Well, Barbara was nothing if not convincing, and the next thing I knew, starting in 1989, she and I were co-directing an annual week-long CME course. After she moved to West Virginia and later to Beaumont, where she is now CMO of a large academic medical center, Jeff Crane stepped in as co-director, and most recently, Martha Pittman. I'm immensely proud that this course has been running now almost without interruption for 30 years. Barbara and I then developed the idea of writing a concise textbook of cytology together, and none of this would have happened without Barbara's inexhaustible energy and enthusiasm. I also want to acknowledge Andrea Abadi, who was the chief of cytology at the National Cancer Institute in the 1980s. It was Andrea who organized the NCI Thyroid Conference in 1987, and I have to thank her for inviting me to co-moderate the 2-day meeting along with endocrinologist Susan Mandel. It was, of course, this conference in Bethesda, Maryland that gave us the Thyroid Bethesda system. The ASC has certainly given me exceptional opportunities for leadership as an executive board member, secretary-treasurer, and ultimately as your president. My presidency gave me the opportunity to expand research support for our young members by introducing the Cytology Shark Tank competition. We've had two very worthy winners, Vivian Weiss and Caitlin Sundling, and it is individuals like Caitlin and Vivian and others who will make sure that our profession remains vibrant. Many of you know that I've been the program director of a fellowship in cytopathology since 1989. I've had the joy of training more than 50 fellows. Bright, ambitious, generous young men and women who've gone on to serve their patients and achieve great things, and they have made me very proud. I'd like to take just a minute to acknowledge some of them. My very first fellow, Sharon Longway, Charo Granados, Nancy Jost and David Martin Ray, Andy Renshaw, Jeff Crane, Bill Faquin, Vicky Joe and Chris French, Xiaohua Chen, Mike Rowe and Yayan Chen, Eric Yang, Eric Huang, and David Huang, Paul Vanderland, Madeline Liu and Wenqi Hu, Marina Vivero, Yelena Mirkovic and Kyle Strickland, and Jeff Mito. Teaching is an unexpected gift. It's opened my window of understanding, and it's raised issues I wouldn't have considered until I found myself teaching students who asked unexpected questions. And finally, a word of thanks to my many colleagues across the country and around the world. Here again, I need to single out a few who've given me great joy and support. Syed Ali, Ritu Nayar, David Rim, Guliz Barkin, Barbara Centeno, Bill Faquin, Ash Chandra, Zubair Baloch, Martha Pittman, Doug Clark, Lisa Tiat, Philippe Veal, Diana Rossi, and Ava Wojcik. The cytology community is rich in talent and generosity, and I will forever be grateful to all of you. And of course, where would I be without my lab? I've been fortunate over the years to work with people who make it a joy to come into work every morning and who understand the meaning of teamwork, even if they do sometimes get a bit out of control. I'd be very remiss if I didn't thank my husband, Todd Stewart, whom many of you have met. Here we are with Dr. Marion Saville, and this is us on our wedding day 11 years ago. To say Todd's been a wellspring of support and companionship is an understatement. I really can't adequately express the depth of my gratitude to him. And now some closing thoughts. Let me start by saying that I believe cytology has a strong and robust future. I'm not saying this just to make you all feel good. I really believe it. I say this as someone who can look back on 40 years of cytology history. 40 years ago, there was no thyroid FNA, and look at where we are today. 30 years ago, as I mentioned before, pathologists in the US were not performing FNAs. 20 years ago, there was no endoscopic FNA of the pancreas. 10 years ago, there was no EVIS. Cytology is constantly reinventing itself. What is it about cytology that allows it to constantly reinvent itself? What, after all, is cytology? You might say that's a silly question to ask. But how often do we actually see people struggle to answer it? And here's just one example of this. I have to say, as a fellowship program director, it bugs me a little bit to read that the ACGME defines cytology as the subspecialty of pathology dedicated to the study and diagnosis of human disease manifested at a cellular level in tissues. All right, it's not really wrong, but it just doesn't get it right. It's vague, and honestly could just as well apply to surgical pathology or even cell biology. Does this really get to the heart and value of our specialty? I don't think so. If we ask the question again, we might get the following alternative answer. Come on, you know what it is. Cytology is paps and urine and sputum and brushings and washings and fluids and FNAs. Okay, but what do these things all have in common? Aha, if you think about it, all these samples are obtained using minimally invasive sampling methods. Scraping, brushing, washing, aspirating, and so on. The value answer, if you will, is the diagnosis and study of disease by examining tissue and fluid samples obtained using minimally invasive methods. That's what all these familiar samples have in common, and that's what separates us from surgical pathology and other disciplines. Okay, well that definition is a mouthful, so let's make it short and sweet and just say cytology is minimally invasive pathologic diagnosis. Why am I making such a fuss about this? Words really do mean something. When you're describing something that you care about, you want to get it right so people appreciate what you do. The words we use to define our profession either convey the value of what we've devoted our lives to, or they don't. Saying we study cells isn't terribly wrong, but I don't think it does it justice. Minimally invasive diagnosis is our heart and soul. It's our strength and the key to our future. Thank you again for this wonderful honor and for the opportunity to share my story with you.